All right. Hello. Hello. Welcome in, everyone. This is Duke here with Black Men's Exchange National, and we are welcoming everyone in to not only join our live, but also happy Women's History Month. It's important to recognize that going on. If you've been paying attention to our channels, we've been uploading various different historical figures since Black History Month, and we're following right into that, honoring Black women throughout the ages. On our social platforms. And tonight, we are excited to discuss She Is Not Your Mammy, addressing Black women's trauma and erasure. Interesting enough, we are excited to see that we have a viewer and community member who's been with us for quite some time, Miss Sonia Ross, who is joining us as a panelist in this particular discussion today. We also have a few other esteemed speakers here, some of you've seen before, but we'll give this moment of time for everyone to introduce themselves. We'll start with Sonia Ross, our guest of honor.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. My name is Sonia Ross. I am a licensed clinical social worker and a somatic psychotherapist. I'm an author of Master Your Depression, A Black Woman's Guide to Emotional Wellness. I currently have a private practice in Greenbelt, Maryland, where I specialize in working with Black women healing trauma and oppression in their bodies. And I also have an Instagram Live bi-weekly helping Black women heal their relationship with their bodies.
Shay, thank you. Daquela?
Peace, everybody. My name is Daquela Hopper. I'm a member services navigator at Black Men's Exchange and Black Women's Exchange. And my focus efforts are with heterosexual and bisexual women.
All right. And we have, of course, Dr.
Cleo Monago. Hi. Good evening, everyone. My name is Cleo. Relevant to the topic, my background is behavior science, behavioral health, and culture analysis, among other things. And this issue is very, very important to me. And I'm really proud of BMX and BWX for presenting it and look forward to the dialogue. And it's always wonderful to see Sonia Ross and Daquela.
All right. Well, we were actually getting ready to mention Kashama is also with us, but they are dealing with some technical difficulties, so they may be in and out during this particular broadcast. We just want to let you all know that. But Kashama, if you're here with us, you can introduce.
Hello, everyone. Kashama Sankofa. I am a regular on the BMX Health live streams, and glad to be here today, and especially glad to have our guest Sonia Ross with us.
All right. So as typical, just want to go over some family feedback from the last time we were with you all. The last time we were with you, Kashama did a amazing presentation entitled Decolonizing Sexuality. And with that, we had a lot of feedback. And so I just want to go over some comments and highlight some individuals and folks. We had Jimmy A, who mentioned that they just get tired of the old stale procreation argument. It is important to examine facts from an intellectual space using critical thinking skills. Thank you all for bringing forth the knowledge. It is so needed. 3 exclamation points. We had Burry Moulton, who mentioned, wow, I'm disappointed I missed this. Glad it is archived. Absolutely. All of our videos will stay up for future viewing and for sharing. You know, spend some time talking with some friends about these particular topics and discussions. We also had Frank Inverted, who said, this is my first time, but I have to leave. Are these sessions recorded? Again, same thing as before. And Fabian said, good points. Thank you for the presentation. And Jimmy A finished off with also stating, thank you all, keep it going. So just letting you all know that we come to you with these particular topics on at this time, bi-monthly basis. And we are always looking for future engagement. If our producer has the numbers scrolling up at the bottom of the screen, if you want to join our community, you can do so by texting 410-826-6264. By texting this number, you can have opportunities to engage with us on a more one-on-one matter. You have opportunities to navigate with case management or member service navigation discreetly if you need it, but also like Sonia Ross, you could be up here talking with us one of these days. So I'm going to finish up talking real quick. We're going to just go straight into our home assignment and then to the topic. All right. With that being stated, I'm probably going to explain that book a little bit further as we get along because there's going to be some talking points that comes up that book really covers. But Tequila actually, one second, I'm hearing a feedback from somewhere. All right. With that being stated, all right, DeQuela, you had a take-home assignment of your own for the people.
Yes, I do. So, Sisters of the Yam, Black Women in Self Recovery by Bell Hooks. So, Bell
Mhm.
Hooks describes this book as a self help book. It examines unconscious trauma we cling to and gives tips for self recovery. This is a really good book for Black women and people that love Black women. So, I think you should read it.
All right. Uh, So, DeQuela, you actually came up with today's topic. I mean, we all came, joined as a team to really dish about what would be the next discussion, but you sat down and you said, here is the topic choice. And I wanted, as a black man and a person who identifies as man, this is a space at this particular time to really listen to women and also give some, insight and feedback as needed at those particular points. But you all have a discussion to lead here, and so take us where you want us to go.
Well, I think we can start off by saying that historically there hasn't been adequate space for Black women to breathe or to not be strong. So we always hear the strong Black woman trope, but the reality of the situation and the reality of the society that we live in is that without Black women's strength and gumption, the Black collective wouldn't be where it is today. But the question we need to ask ourselves is that level of strength still necessary? And is it beneficial to our well being?
Hmm. Uh, Thoughts on that particular statement, Sonia?
No, what she said just really resonated with me because I have conversations with women every day about this very topic. That our resilience and our strength has carried us through the centuries, but we're not carrying, even though we hold a lot of trauma in our bodies from what we've experienced individually, collectively, and ancestrally. We have an opportunity to rest and take care of ourselves that our ancestors didn't have, and we don't have to have the same level of force and unconscious commitment to work that they had. So we can actually begin to deprogram ourselves so that we can begin to understand that we're safe, that we can rest, that we can heal, we can process the traumas that we've been through, and we can begin to have a different relationship with our bodies. So she really hit on a lot there.
All right. So this is something that I know I could resonate with as a man. It's something I've recognized even in my own journey, but keeping it focused with women, I know a subject matter that came up to me at one point was is that uh, mothers are mothers, but they're women first. They're human beings
Mm-hmm.
first. And I remember hearing that at the age of like 24 and it being like this wow moment. And it's such a simple concept and
Mm-hmm.
a simple truth. But I remember growing up not really having the space to assess a black woman
Yeah.
as a human being because my mother was like God, right? It was like you did everything, you took care
Mm-hmm.
of the house. When daddy wasn't around for whatever reason, there were these things that you had to do. And so when I would see my mother struggle, I could not process it as like a person going through struggles. I processed it as like this magical human being that is now struggling. And therefore, the disappointment in my eyes was also quote unquote worse, and that treatment
Yeah.
wasn't fair. So these are things that I'm considering. Any thoughts of where we're at so far, Cleo and Kashama?
Well, excuse me, I'm just listening because maybe because of the mother I had, and because of who I am organically, I think I've always been very concerned about women, Black women in particular. I've always seen Black women as a interesting mixture of vulnerability and genius and power, and I've never seen my mother as not dimensional. I've always seen her as dimensional, and I see women as dimensional. I believe that Black women are profoundly traumatized and unresolved in terms of it being something that we are even allowed to engage. And that's a problem. And I have other perspectives that I will get into later in this conversation that are that are relevant to Black women through the prism of Black men that I would like to talk about. But before going into the male perspective, I want to hear more from the sisters.
All right.
So, Kashama, did you want to say something before I?
No, I don't have
Yeah.
anything to add
Okay.
as of yet.
All right. Well, so one thing that stuck out to me that you said was you saw your mother as magical, and that goes into the Black Girl Magic hashtag. It's like Black women go above and beyond for everybody and everybody's mama, but Black women don't worry about themselves. Black women
Absolutely.
oftentimes put other people before their own selves, which is like you can't expect to lead a movement if you are deteriorated.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was just going to say, I've spoken, and in my own healing process and speaking to my clients, we have this conversation often. We have to interrupt the conditioning that tells us we have to be everything to everyone at all times without taking care of ourselves. We have to recognize our own humanity as human beings, and then as women, and then as mothers, so that we can kind of interrupt some of this internalized, white supremacy myth, anti-Blackness, so that we can show up as full human beings. And so, you know, it's really important that we become mindful that, we can't give from an empty cup. And I know that's kind of a cliche thing, and people say that overall, but I just had a conversation with someone recently, and I was like, you need to give from the overflow. All the time that we've been conditioned to always give from a draining cup. And, and that's a byproduct of, our ancestry, the cultural trauma that we've received or that we've experienced. And we have to begin to interrupt that by becoming more conscious and aware of what's happening within us.
Understood. I had see some comments here. I want to make sure we point those out. Annette Phillips said, "Hallelujah, hallelujah." Team Legendary Jabo, the Texas Prince. Shout out to you, Annette. Thank you for watching. Kat Mahari, love you, Kat. It's been a little while. Say, I don't think my ancestors had an unconscious commitment to work. In quotations, needs must is not an unconscious paradigm. And Duca, hey, hello to you. Welcome in for this particular conversation. I'm looking through Ashley, and I just wanted to do a quick origin. Do you all know about the origin of Black Girl Magic, or that saying or phrase? So I just did a quick Google search, and allegedly its popularity came up in 2013 by a young person by the name of Kashawn Thompson. And what's interesting to me is that it says that it's been around since 2013, but I almost feel like I've been hearing this term or phrase like all my life. Like this idea that there's this mythicism about the ability for Black women to survive in this country. Dr. Monago mentioned earlier about always seeing the dimensionality of Black women. And I think this is just a struggle that I've had in general with Black people, that I've never really been able to process the dimensions of Black people because I'm constantly seeing and processing us through not only our trauma, but our resiliency to trauma. So it's like I'm praising the resiliency and not necessarily dealing or helping to reduce the trauma. And I think that's like a real navigation tactic that we're missing in our communities. Like I'm praising you for how you deal with this trauma, but I'm not trying to help you reduce this trauma. And this is, I think, one of the barriers that we have in our community at this point.
Well, Duke, I think one thing, well, you're absolutely right. But one thing that actually gets skipped over, because even before getting to the point to where you're actively working to reduce the trauma or end the trauma, what happens is it's first not even acknowledged. The resilience is acknowledged, and the strength of Black women, are acknowledged, but the reasons why they have to be strong or the reasons why they are resilient, that's often ignored before we even get to the point of trying to slow it down or end it. There's just no context.
At the risk of sounding controversial, and it's not my intention, I'm not sure if all Black women are strong. I know Sonia's strong. I know my mother is strong. I see Dequila as a very self-realized young woman. But that's not all. That's not all I see. I see black women on a spectrum of starting on the other end, wounded, angry, sometimes vicious, um, unresolved, insecure, um, dealing with a society that perpetually throws their beauty as Africans into question. So I see a lot of women do a lot of compensatory stuff to make up for that in ways that mimics white beauty standards at disproportionate numbers. Um, I see, I've seen some sisters cling to the concepts of black girl magic and black girls rock, not simply to celebrate being a black woman, but to vindictively one upmanship on one up men or womanship, if you will, of black men. And I see sisters who are healthier, who are more in working toward bringing balance between black men and women. I see all kinds of things, but I don't see the one liner as a general state of being of strong and all that stuff. I and I see some things that are even worse than what I'm describing right now
Yeah.
among black women. And I think those things that I've talked about mostly right now, those problematic behaviors, are getting worse because we don't have a reliable, systemic, or permanent rites of passage for the healing of any of us.
Mm.
And we live in a society whose most profound messaging systems, which is the school system and media, are both anti-black male and black female, and we're not resolving it. So we have a spectrum here, not one way of being.
Yeah. If I can say something about that,
Mhm.
when I actually agree with what Dr. Manago is saying, and that's why I think it's important for Black women to embrace ourselves across the spectrum. Our behaviors can be vicious. We have internalized a lot of toxicity that we don't know how to heal, so we kind of spew it back on each other and other community members. And so I always encourage people to embrace their full humanity or get support around doing so, because warts and all, the darkest places, we need to look at the darkest places of ourselves, and we have to look at our light. And the reason, as I've learned from Dr. Manago, why we have to talk about anti-blackness is that sometimes anti-blackness really prevents us from really looking at ourselves in a full capacity. So I agree. There are people who are a little bit more balanced, and they can do things a certain way, and they manage their trauma response, so they can perform in a certain way. But there's others that cannot, and we can't forget about these community members and not make enough space for all Black women to be present. Those who are still in their trauma response, those are still brewing with a lot of toxicity, but put it in the proper social and cultural context so that they can really understand and not be shamed by their behavior. They can understand that their behavior is part of trauma and oppression, individual trauma and oppression, and have an open cultural dialogue. I think that's someone that's always missing when we have people who are famous Black women who always talk about how they've made it, but they don't talk about those darker parts of themselves. And of course, they don't have to share because it's very vulnerable. But I think if we begin to have a more open dialogue about our true pain and what we've had to overcome, not in a Black girl magic way, but just to kind of extend the bandwidth of what our humanity looks like, I think that could, we have to lead by example. And I think that could help a lot of people.
Mm. I'm hoping that you, and I know Dr. Manago most likely has a perspective on this as well, but this term shame, I've come to experience it in my life as a useless emotion. And what I mean by that is I've had moments where I should absolutely have been embarrassed about something, as a cautionary tale of not to do that particular incident again. But I've had friends who like to linger on that moment for some reason and want to like keep putting that moment as this example period, if you will, of when I was not my
Mm,
best.
yeah.
And I'm really thinking that shame in general in the Black community has become one of these useless, in my opinion, emotions that does not allow or promote actual healing and change behaviors. And I was just wondering, like, do you all have, your scholarly perspectives on what shame is and what is it used for in a healing context, if any?
Well, shame doesn't fit in a healing context
Right.
at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
And
that's important. Yeah.
Hmm.
and a lot of us are, and this goes beyond gender, are unconsciously, and in some instances, very ashamed of being Black. And we don't know any sanctuary outside of that perspective. So we spew it, some of us, not all of us, but some of us do our best to shame each other and embarrass each other because that's how we feel about each other. And to me, taking a look at things like that and informing people why they do that is foundational transformative work, because a lot of us don't know why we do what we do and don't even know there's something else to do other than toxic behavior.
Yeah.
I agree. I
I,
agree. I think that, like you said, shame um, is toxic, but sometimes Black people and Black women use shame as a way to protect their loved ones. Um, and it sounds backwards, but it's the truth.
Could you give us an example of how shame, in terms of intention,
Um,
has been able to protect somebody?
as far as intention, so for example, say a mother and a child are in a grocery store, and the child is acting up, and maybe the mother will say, I don't know, sit your Black A down before whatever, whatever, making them feel like whatever they did was wrong. But it's really to protect them so that, one, they don't look like a bad parent, and then two, so that the child isn't punished by some other outside factor.
See, I'm not a woman, and Daquila just got me started. So
Okay.
I'm gonna work. I'm gonna be quiet and hopefully remember what I was gonna say, because we'll have a reaction to that. But let me let me.
yes. So I think shame is unconstructive. I get to Quayla's point, and I've seen it in action, and honestly, just makes me cringe. Because as someone who was a traumatized child, I know what that does to a child's insides, and there's a better way to handle those type of situations. I,
Mm.
I work with people to like release shame, and again about embracing our humanity and the things that and the behaviors that we may exhibit when we're in our trauma response, when we're scared, when we're acting out, so many of the difficulties we've been. We can't be shamed by them. I find shame unproductive. We need to put them in the proper social and cultural context so that we can embrace our own humanity. So I find shame to be not a constructive thing. Even though I
Uh,
know I'm a licensed social worker, but I know like Brene Brown, a white woman, she's written all of her manifestos about shame and this, that, and the third. I don't 100% agree with all of that, but I know in the mainstream that's something that's talked about a lot.
It reminds me of a moment Dr. Joy DeGruy brought up about post-traumatic slave syndrome and using shame as a way to denigrate Black children in a way to protect them inside of a white supremacist culture, because it comes from the idea that if you denigrate the child, then that child won't be picked for slavery. But right now, and just want to move the topic along, I'm I'm j- I'm nervous about going here, but I just know that it's a super important thing in our conversations. Is, are Black women ashamed of Black men? Is this, like, at this point in time we have a lot of disagreement in our community, and there's love too. I want to be clear that there's love too, and it all depends on which circles and spectrums that you happen to be in. But I know that the narrative that is pushed and promoted heavily on social media as well as in various different media platforms is the idea that Black men and Black women are not good for each other. This is why we happen to see Black women oftentimes single, oftentimes talking about why going over into other pastures is so much better as far as in their love life. And it's just many different, think pieces and articles at this point in time that says that Black women should be quote unquote moving on, and not a lot of beyond the there's a lot of misinformation I do know about. We can get into some of that misinformation, but I think a key question for me is there a shameness that's going on here? Has anyone witnessed that between Black women and Black men?
From my perspective, I would say I don't really see Black women being ashamed of Black men, but a lot of times I do see um, Black men degrading Black women on social media, and of course, obviously, all the narratives and everything. But I do see it often, and I think that's part of the reason why a lot of Black women are single is because they don't want to be degraded or they feel degraded themselves.
Yeah. Well, I think
I
for a
remember
lot of,
back.
I'm sorry, Dr. Minago.
Go on, sister.
No, I was just going to say for a lot of women, I can't speak for all, but in my observation, I don't think there's shame there so much. There is a lot of unresolved anger and hurt and mistrust. And then, of course, if you're only getting your information through social media and the media, it's going to warp your mind and give you a negative perspective. So I think obviously we have to break that link of looking to the media, social media or otherwise, for it to see healthy relationships. When Black women really, as somebody said in the comments, start paying attention to themselves and work on their own healing and seeing their own humanity, then maybe they can see the humanity of others in their communities, their parents, the Black men, and then you can make a critical judgment about if this is someone I want to be with, but it's just not acting from an angry response, from a reactive place. And so I think, and even if Black women are partnered with a Black man, there still sometimes can be a lot of anger that's unhealed within them that just kind of festers, and that can be very toxic and damaging to the relationship.
I think an unaddressed dynamic that is also at play is the fact that we live in a society that is what people describe as patriarchal, and whereas men are the so-called rulers and are also expected to so-called provide resources and to protect, so to speak, women and or children. And in a society where that's the rule or that's the so-called norm, but then you have Black people, whereas that's not necessarily the case with us. We're an oppressed people, and things don't work like it worked for the so-called dominating society or white society, the way it works in our community. Black men haven't always been able to be, and still aren't in many cases, to be the protector, provider of resources, or so-called ruler that is expected or promoted in this society. And with that happening, one, I think it leaves Black women vulnerable in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
And it also can leave Black men resentful of Black women in a lot of ways, cause Black men to act out. So I think that whole patriarchy dynamic plays a huge role where it may exist between Black men and Black women.
I think that's important, Kashama, because, and I want to keep this on women, even though women are a part of men's lives and there's a relationship here that should not be broken, that should be acknowledged as part of the healing process for both women and men. However, one thing that a lot of us don't consider among so many things is that, as you mentioned, Kashama, we live in a very patriarchal society. I mean, the farther back you go, the more industrial strength that patriarchy is. And Black men for almost 300 years, and some would say up to present, have not had the opportunity to actually fulfill the only frame of reference for what manhood should be in their own, in everybody's in this society, haven't been able to be men. And there's always been a danger to men who stepped up beyond passivity and tried to be men. And there's a intergenerational terror and unresolved pain and acculturated, which means normalized misdirected rage, which looks like violence and all kinds of stuff, because that's how it manifests. That is never put in context while they drag the body off, from police brutality or from the cops being called or whatever. And Black men and women have a unimaginable, and we need to be able to start imagining it so we can resolve it, but unimaginable history of dehumanization and torture that we are beating each other up for sometimes for having experienced that, instead of coming together as males and females who have both been oppressed, in my opinion, equally so. We should be doing what we're doing right now, because Black men and women need each other. Now, we're being trained very successfully not to. I mean, I just saw another ad from Kodak cameras or something where they found a biracial child from someplace, because these are all actors. These aren't real families. They went and found a biracial child with the classic red fro. Y'all have seen it, and a Black mother and a white father, and they're creating this perpetual "y'all don't need each other, you are not each other's option" narrative. That I'm one of the rare people I know who have some level of a platform that's constantly talking about it. But we'll hear about Black girl magic every 5 minutes, and Black girls rock, Black girls swimming, Black girls breathing, all the stuff that they got Black women doing, but not Black women resolving conflict with Black people. We're looking at who I call Obama, who y'all call Kamala Harris. She's the vice president, and Black women were jumping up and down happy that she was the vice president. However, her practice professionally and her personal life is a step away from Black men, which perpetuates what's not being talked about: the split between Black men and women and Black women and men. So I look at all this Black girl magic and stuff like that as a perpetual narrative, as a part of an agenda to keep us divided.
I know that there is top quality level manipulation happening on this subject matter. I have an example where a Black woman tweeted, and it went viral. Growing up, it was Black men who made me feel, I'm paraphrasing at this time, it was Black men who made me feel the worst about my features. And there was this, if anyone's heard about the app Clubhouse, that particular Black woman had created a room in order to discuss this subject for Black men to also, listen in and occasionally respond to certain things. And there was this moment where, that the question came up, Black men, why do you treat Black women this way? Why do you talk about our features and blah, blah, blah? And so the Black men responded as best as they knew how, a few of them going into that this is not something that we have solved within our own selves, right? Like, we look at ourselves this particular way, and you as an extension of that. And so, this comes from, white supremacy, blah, blah, blah. And the Black women in this particular room, and mind you, not every room is a classroom, so we get that. But in this particular room, they didn't want to hear that answer. Like that, they just said that no, we don't want to hear that. We want to know exactly why. So I chose to speak up, and I said that I think it's dangerous to ignore the truth, right, in order to present a particular narrative that we want to be true, that Black men are simply doing this because they're evil, like that's this particular way. But long story short, in this room, here's the grade A manipulation. There was this argument that was made that Black women are not getting married to Black men, and that there was a study that shows that black men are choosing black wives based on how light they are. Like if you were a lighter skinned black woman, you were more likely to marry. And I said, this is BS. This is not true. Send me the link, right? Show me the data on this. This is not a real study, right? As far as that was proven true. And so I weighed on it. They tell me Google it first because it's the first answer of social justice warriors things that we're not going to do the labor for you, blah 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 blah. But I said no, we're in a dialogue. You presented something that I'm certain doesn't exist, so I need you to give me what you found and read, right? So they give me the link. It's a 48-page document. I read it because I know how to read research papers. This is part of what I do in life. So I read the research paper and I'm screenshotting things to send back to her. And the answers inside this research paper says that there is absolutely no correlation between it. Like the question was, does this exist? But the answers inside the 48-page check is that there's no correlation that this happens. In fact, black men are most likely people to marry black women. And blah, blah, blah. Like it's all these different things that show up. And it also pointed out in this exact same research paper that the propensity for black men not to marry black women often has to do with incarceration and being killed off in homicidal things. So I present this back to this black woman who sent me this information, and I'm like, "Hey, here's this." And her first response, I forget exactly what it was, but she said, you need to check here. And I say, I'm sorry, I'm actually quoting what you sent me. That's the first thing. And her response to that was, well, you believe what you want. And I'm like, I think that's where we're at. I think that's really where we're at as a people. We are believing what we want about each other as opposed to believing the truth. So that's great manipulation.
What's sad is not in reality us believing what we want. We believe what we've been brainwashed to think. Because no one would want to be anti themselves in terms of if they were actually in their right mind. They would not want, particularly in a racist society where you have this other option that's killing your people through police brutality, etc., that you can have the option to have issues with. But instead of going there, you want to believe some crazy stuff about black people with no context. Or when somebody like you did, Duke, raise some issues with some facts and some science, they go, well, no, you believe what you want to believe, because some people get a dysfunctional emotional charge of being able to successfully be anti-black. And in this instance, it's successfully anti-black male to actually master it and make it happen. They give themselves a point. I really got him. And we have to unlearn.
Before we go on, I just wanted to read some comments. Did you have something else to say, Cleo?
No, I can wait.
All right. So Carl Taste Ransom from Facebook gave us red, black, and green hearts. Tamina Rawls from Facebook said, no, there's no respect being taught on both sides. Lena Lathan said the narrative forces the shame. Media enforces the message.
That's right.
Law B says the scheme to pathologize the black man will turn with as much ferocity on black women next. Yeah.
I would say again.
Can I just say something to Dr. Manago's point? When Duke mentioned his experience, what I heard in that is that, we have such an unaddressed trauma response inside of us as Black women that fuels our rage. When actually presented with facts, it just caused us to kind of dissociate, and we just push away from the truth, even if it has a legitimate, basis in reality. And then the media feeds on that. The media does not want us to not be in a traumatized state, because when we're in a traumatized state, we're easier to control and turn on each other, so we attack each other. And so that's what I heard in that, because most Black women are in their trauma response. And that's why we have to normalize these dialogues and these conversations so that we can actually name it and put a voice to it, because and so that we understand we are all in it. Black men and Black women, we are all in a trauma response, and we have to begin to resolve it. Else we're not going to be able to have conversations with each other. I mean, once I was able to work on myself and talk about and manage my own trauma response and then fully embrace my own humanity, then I could hear a Black man's story and not be triggered and reactive. And I can begin to see a Black man as a full human being. And my partner is a Black man. And, I've seen the evolution of our relationship because I can see him in his fullness. I'm not looking for him to be my savior or my provider. I see him as another human being on this journey with me, and all with the complexity that comes from being a Black man in this society. And it is so triggering for us as Black women to see Black men as human beings, as vulnerable, because there's centuries of unprocessed trauma in our bodies about the vulnerability of Black men and the vulnerability that we still feel inside of ourselves.
Mm-hmm. I'm just hearing I just want to highlight, and Cleo continue, that there is this lack of ability in Black communities in general to process each other's vulnerabilities. Like, we need everyone to be strong all the time, no matter what. It's not even a gendered narrative. It's just, this is the agenda of the Black community. Be strong. And that's it. There's no contextualization of that strength. Cleo?
And strong is a figure of speech.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes be strong means be defensive, be vicious, be enraged, be resistant to what I'm saying, be strong. And often the strength is a weakness. It's not strength, it's a figure of speech. But Daquela said something earlier, which I want to illuminate, because it is a frame of reference that I think is problematic for us across the gendered divide, where we are divided. She used an example of a parent to protect her child, saying, if you don't sit your Black ass down, blah, 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 blah. Well, part of what we're doing, and you've all heard me talk about this before, is co-racializing ourselves, making ourselves racialized instead of humanized. Like, no other group says, sit your white ass down, sit your Latino ass down, sit your Chinese, sit your Japanese ass down. I mean, I've been to Japan. I've been to these places, and you don't hear it. And when you do hear something like it, they're copying and making fun of Black behavior. And ironically, that is not Black behavior. That's enslaved, domesticated African people's behavior. Because when you go to Africa, no one says, and I've been there, so I'm not just talking smack here, no one says, sit your Black ass down, even in Ghana. Not unless they're mimicking the movie they saw on the airplane that was from the United States of America, and they heard Eddie Murphy tell somebody to sit their Black ass down. And they use the N-word for the same reasons. They've seen it. But my point here is that part of this racialization of ourselves, and this is all unconscious, is a dehumanization of ourselves. And when you don't see Black people as important in its value in contrast to whites and everybody else, of course, your misdirected rage is going to be even more wounding. It's going to be even more vicious, more deep. And even your so-called approach to disciplining a child can be, sit your Black ass down. That's not helpful. That's not a nurturing, loving, even though that might be the intention. Even though to protect might be the goal, but we learn how to protect ourselves from trying to protect ourselves from evil people. Mm-hmm. And we can't do evil to get the opposite of evil when we engage Black people.
At this time, two things. I want to open the link if you want to like to join in. If you have a question or comment, we have a full panel here, and we're also coming towards the time. But we would still love to hear from our audience if you have a question or comment. But just before that, while Adam produces the link, Sonia, could you tell us a little bit more about Black women and disconnection, their bodies, and the work that you do to help reconnect? And what exactly is that messaging for Black women? Why is it so powerful?
Well, it's a long journey, Duke, for us. When we've been, we embody centuries of oppression and trauma. And so when I do my work with Black women, it's about, having an intentional, socially and culturally relevant conversation about the impact of trauma and oppression on our body and how it shows up in our behaviors and our actions, and how it's caused us to relate to ourselves first, which is self-neglect, overwork, not taking care of the aches and pains in our body, really talking about how we're a slave to productivity, We ignore our own needs and emotions. We sometimes smother our emotions with food, sex, drugs, alcohol, distractions of all types, and really being intentional about asking, why are you doing this? Making them aware that these are often coping mechanisms and learning behaviors that we've embodied in our community over centuries to cope with trauma, pain, and oppression, because we weren't allowed to be vulnerable. We weren't allowed to feel. We weren't allowed to have intimate experiences of our own emotions, because to Tequela's point, we were probably been told, we know this to be true, shut up and stop crying, don't feel anything, because we didn't want to attract attention. And then these became cultural norms and behaviors that became abusive in a lot of our homes. And so it's about having it's like an unlearning process, so that Black women can begin to have a healed relationship with their body, a healthy relationship with their body, where they embrace their own humanity, they respect themselves in the full spectrum of their vulnerability. Anything that they've done is not shamed or looked at in a negative way. I encourage them to embrace their full narrative, no matter how dark or upsetting they've been trained to think it is. Abortions, miscarriages, prostitution, sex work, bunch of different lovers, whatever the case may be, embrace it as a full narrative of their life and making actual cultural connections of how things, how it was created, instead of shaming them about certain actions and behaviors, so that they can begin to embrace themselves and have compassion for themselves, have love for themselves, and then begin to embody a new relationship with themselves. So what this does, by embracing their humanity, then they can take themselves to the doctor. They can take their sick days. They can rest. They can advocate for themselves. They can set new boundaries. They can, drink more water, eat healthier food, not use toxic coping mechanisms, and have a fuller, healthier relationship with themselves. Put it simply.
Thank you for that. The take-home assignment, everyone, is not only bring up. I'm sorry. The book. Daquela, could you remind everyone about the book?
Yeah, so the book is Sisters of the Yam, Black Women in
Yes.
Self-Recovery by Bell Hooks.
And in addition to that, there's also Citizen by Claudia Rankine. And just summarize again, I know that Citizen, one of the things that was impactful to me about it, it's a book of short poems and essays. And one of the important things that was highlighted in this book for me was the unconscious response to racism that the body has. And Citizen, it talks about all Black people, but she takes a moment to really focus in on our sister Serena Williams and how the industry had did so much to this Black woman that she just kept silent about in so many different incidents. And so when an outburst did happen, it would be for like the most tiniest infraction, but Claudia was able to contextualize and say that this was a buildup on so many different other racialized incidents. And it's not just, the typical, outlandish or outburst behavior that we experience with all individuals. At some point, things swell up and pop. But racism is its own specific abuse that has to be contextualized in that light. And she really did that in that book. And so I encourage people to take a look at that and help humanize each other a lot better. Again, reminder that link is open. Also, in addition, please text our community 410-826-6264 for all opportunities to stay engaged with us. We would love to hear from you all in our future endeavors. I think I may be speaking too soon or something, but I think that Cleo had a image or something that he wanted to have showcased, and so we could talk about that.
Yeah, before Adam brings it up, one of my interests in this conversation is, while it's appropriately focused on sisters, I have this fantasy that Black men and women come together, and that Black men and women have each other's back, and that Black women and men walk past their abuse and trauma and forgive each other like we did Dylan Roof. I know I didn't forgive Dylan Roof, and probably none of y'all forgave Dylan Roof.
I just read about the story of the Black man that beat him up in jail. I don't know if you know about that, but
oh, okay. Well, I heard that was a while ago. He did get beat up, but I want to hear that story. But every time there is a war against our camaraderie. There is a war against us loving each other, having each other's back, and respecting each other. And this image is one of my favorite resistors to it. This image that Adam's going to put up in a moment is an example of when a sister gets some, or brother gets some attention or media highlighting, or their activism has been so profound that it's gone to other heights. They do this stuff that this woman was resisting, and the picture, when it comes up, you'll see what I'm talking about. One of my favorite sisters from our history, Fannie Lou Hamer. Mm-hmm. The feminist movement, while she was rising in stature and recognition because of her work on our behalf, was trying to get her to be mad at black men and to join the feminist movement. And she said, I'm not hung up on this liberating myself from black man. I'm not going to try that thing. She was from the South, so you can hear her accent in this thing. I got a black husband, 6'3" and 250 pounds with a 14-inch shoe. Now, you know what the implications are there. Anyway, that I don't want to be liberated from. She said, no, you ain't liberating me from that. But we came here to work side by side with the black man and trying to bring liberation to our people, to black people. So she didn't allow the feminist movement and all this leave men alone and men are bad and I don't like black men. She put it all in context. She realized, look, I need my man. I need black men. Y'all not separating me. And he got a 14, a size 14 shoe.
All right.
That's what she said. I ain't making that up. That's what the sister said. She said, I'm not going to be liberated from my man.
Indeed, she did. I see that we actually do have a guest joining in. We have Kat Mahari. Welcome on in.
Hey, Kat.
We'd love to hear and see from you. What's going on?
Hey, sister.
Hey, peace. Well, I just want to add on to what Dr. Monalgo was saying, particularly in the context of Fannie Lou Hamer. I was actually quite recently listening to Elaine Brown, former chairperson of the Black Panther Party, and it was an old video, and in the video, the interviewer asked her about the roles of gender along the lines of gender when it comes to who was doing the cooking in the kitchen. And she checked her. She said, first of all, we were a paramilitary organization, the only one in this country, and she named names. She said whether it was AIM, whether it was the Weather Underground, whether it was SNCC, whether it was SLCC, we were the only one who were really about that life. And you're gonna come to me, former chairperson, and ask me who was cooking in the kitchen? We weren't just cooking, first of all, in the kitchen. Not only did we have our own garden and our own holistic school and educational center, but we also, as a paramilitary organization hell-bent on liberation and revolution, that was what the people came for. And wherever you were assigned, whether it was the newspaper or not, you did the work that was required of you in your assigned spots. And I just think that goes into what Dr. Monalgo was saying about Fannie Lou Hamer. If you're down to do the work, that means you have to do the individual as well as collective work for liberation. And before I get out of here, I just want to say, don't ever forget what Toure said. Organize, organize, organize. You know, don't think just buying a candle is going to get you healed, okay? All right. Bye-bye.
Yes. Thank you so much for that. Kat actually just inspired me to share. Before the show, we were just talking about some things amongst ourselves, people. And Sonia Sanchez that came up, who is a influential and powerful figure for the Black arts movement, otherwise known as BAM. And she traveled, the country during that time promoting a Black artistic renaissance, if you will. And I remember going to go see her live, and one of the questions in the audience during the Q&A session was the Black arts movement sexist? And Sonia, like, she really took one of those moments, and she said, duh, but, and then she finished it up, and she said, but the Black arts movement was sexist because the world that we live in, the country that we live in, is sexist. Not because Black men and Black women were practicing some kind of separate, specific sexism or special sexism. Like, she really went in it about that. She said and she finished off that particular thing by stating that the number one killer of any movement is gossip. Mm-hmm. And so I just really thought it was really important that she has shed that particular, because it was something that the people in that that particular room just did not hear before, that yes, like there was sexism, but not because Black people are sexist. And she really contextualized that in that particular room, and so I really loved that what she did there.
The English language is what people would call sexist and patriarchal. I
I
remember
agree.
being little, and I always found it so interesting when I would see my parents' name or another couple's name that I knew, and they would be Mr. and Mr. John, Mr. and Mrs. John Smith, or Mr. and Mrs. Bobby Jackson. The
Mhm.
woman was always erased and put under the man. Even when we speak English, I was 30 years old before a sister came and told me to be conscious of saying guys, you guys,
Mm.
Mhm.
that's something I do. I mean, it's just the male gender is taken as the affirmative or as the default in this language.
Mhm.
And in many other European languages, if you study Spanish or what have you. So I mean, it's important to understand that we live in a society that is based on anti-blackness and anti-woman, and if you want to like shake these things, you have to be proactive at doing it. Don't just assume. You can't just everything is anti-black, everything is sexist until you choose to make it not that way.
Mhm.
That's something we should understand.
The last time we were with you all, we talked about decolonizing sexuality. Before I say what I want to say, I want to read Kat's comment. She said, exactly. That's also a point that Elaine Brown included. We live in a patriarchy, so how are we not going to live it as well? Only through active liberatory work. Apologies, y'all. So absolutely. But along with decolonizing sexuality, it really is a subject matter for us to decolonize gender in this European context. But in one of the examples that I have for that is that something that I've done with my students is when it comes to discussing topics of quote unquote femininity and masculinity amongst Black males, I'll ask a question. I've done it with adults in high school students and middle school students, is out of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, who was the more masculine one? And I get the same puzzled responses oftentimes. It's always like that, the twist up face. Very few people catch on. Very few people catch on, but then other people begin to answer. And what I say in that particular, after everyone's going around, is that what we know is the people who squinch up their faces, that there should not be an answer to this question, right? Because both of them were Black men. That's just what it is. Both of them were men, and they identified as males, and they're Black men. But because we live in America, we have these traits that we associate with masculinity that
Mhm.
means that there is an answer to this question when it should not be. And so I've always used that as an example to discuss like how we have not given space to actually contextualize and humanize each other, because we're always identifying and observing each other based on these particular traits. So I think that's something important to go through. We love you too, Alicia. I don't know, you've been just giving us lots of emojis and phew, and we love it. All bits of it. I wish we could get audio cues for that. We're going to have that built into some of our sessions going forward. Some audio cues when we get love and affirmation in the comments. We're at 2 minutes of the hour, everyone, and so if I'm not seeing any other questions or comments coming through on the live, I am prepared to wrap up if there's no other commentary from our panelists here. Anything else that we should go over?
Well, I just want to emphasize what I think is the bottom line. Let's invest in not hurting each other.
Mm-hmm.
Let's intentionally invest in not having a reaction that's going to be hurtful and that's going to, I call it trauma deflection. Let's invest in trauma deflection as a norm. And because what I think has Black women sometimes taken sides against Black men, and some of the other things that we've complained about is they have actually been hurt. They've actually been the direct recipient of someone's viciousness that's male in this instance in terms of why they're angry. However, as Sonia Sanchez put in context, and as the sister from the Black Panthers, Kat, put in context, they're not acting out their own genetic makeup. They're acting out a larger society's messaging in context that is all we know. I always tell people in my classes who keep thinking we're making all these choices when I'm talking to black folks, I say, okay, speak Swahili right now. Do it. And they go, I say, go on, since people make so many choices. Because like they love to find another reason to blame and write off black people. The choice, I said, you can't speak Swahili because you don't know nothing about it. Not because you made a choice to not know about Swahili. You were given a language. It was all you know. And your whole worldview is wrapped up in the prison of English.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to break out of prison. Word prison, behavioral prison, attitude prison, vicious prison toward black people, and be more compassionate with people who are just like us, who's gone through the exact same historical experience, and learn to be more compassionate, but also honor each other's pain. Because if a sister comes up to me, and they have, and said, a black man did so and so and so and so to me, and I don't get defensive. I ask her, one of the questions I've asked so many sisters is, why do you think that happened? You know, I mean, it must be for a reason. And in many cases, they don't have a critical analysis. They just know they're hurting. They just know that they got hit. But I still hang in there with them very strategically, with very calm demeanor, so I won't come off angry or reactionary and go, why do you think that occurs? And then their critical thinking capacity starts to get triggered, and I help them answer that question. And often they've never even considered. They still don't deserve to be hurt. That's for sure. But they never considered cause and effect. And I'm going to close my comments with this. The N-word, which is a dehumanizing, crazy-making word, is another phenomena that keeps us from critically thinking and caring about black people. That word. But I welcome this conversation. I love engaging my sisters, and I love building bridges and mending bridges and sustaining bridges that are already there between us. Thank you for coming, sisters.
Thank you so much. I was honored to be here.
Any closing statements from you all?
Come on, DeQuayla.
Well, I just want to say that black women, you are beautiful, you are amazing, you can do everything, and you can do anything, and live in your truth, because that is a revolutionary act, and it will lead us to our black liberation. If you can just be yourself, live in your truth, and be okay with who you are, where you came from, and where you're going. And I love you.
Ashe.
And I love all of y'all.
Ashe. I love you too.
The word that I would like to leave with us is nuance. Because we have to understand that there's no such thing as privilege among any of our groups of black people. But tonight we're talking about black women. So in keeping the focus on our sisters, understand that there is nuance to their oppression, and it is gender based because they are black women. Whereas the courtrooms are taking black men out, the hospitals are taking sisters out. Whereas Willie Horton, I believe, was used by either the Reagan politicians or whatever to demonize black men. There was a sister who became the face of welfare queen, so-called welfare queen, and all of these things affect us in different ways. So nuance is one thing I think we should keep in the forefront of our minds, and understand that black women have a special place in white power's oppression of our people, as do us all.
Sonia, as you wrap up, could you also let people know where to find you and how to get in touch with your work?
Sure. My book's name is Master Your Depression, A Black Woman's Guide to Emotional Wellness. If you Google it, it'll come up. And I can be reached on Instagram at Full Circle Therapy Services. Full Circle Therapy Services, all spelled out. And I have my class that's bi-weekly at 3 p.m. on Wednesdays on Black female embodiment. And I post there regularly for helping Black women build a more compassionate, loving relationship with their body in order to heal.
All right. Well, I want to thank all of you all for joining in for this discussion once again. I think for me, the number one takeaway that I'm having is that there's been a lot of work done to separate Black men and Black women, even when it comes to our quote unquote healing, creating a lot of creations of safe spaces and that are specific for gender groups. And while that work is important and should continue, there has to also be a lot more collaborative safe spaces built up, because the fact that our struggles are not independent of each other, but we keep trying to solve it independent of each other is a big problem. And so I'm just really thankful for this particular dialogue. And we know the risk. We know the risk of what happens when we don't have these dialogues, the substance abuses and things that people get attached to. And so if you know anyone or struggling with, any type of help needed, not only can they reach out to Sonia Ross's work, please connect with our member service navigators by texting 410-826-6264. Thank you again for this dialogue, everyone. I'm signing out.
Thank you.
Good night,
Peace,
everyone.
everybody. Peace.